we are. It is Thursday, May the 27th, and this is the really big class celebrating new music month, this month of May, and this is actually my final class of this masterclass series. So I'll start just by talking a little bit about Elizabeth, who I met at the Cleveland Institute of Music. We were classmates in the studio of Donald Weilerstein, and I spoke about this before when you taught the violin masterclass last summer, I guess it was. I will never forget hearing you play the Beethoven Violin Concerto in Cleveland. I remember the sound. I remember the way your fourth finger came down on this perfect note and the perfect vibrato, and I also remember sort of the calm and seriousness with which you played, and it made a huge impact on me. In the last year or two years or so, we've reconnected since I moved to the UK, I've been absolutely astonished and thrilled by the performances of yours I've seen online of brand new music. So I would love to ask you, and I told you I'd ask nice questions. So when did you have you always had an interest in playing contemporary music? Or is this something kind of new? Or could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with playing music of living composers?
Yeah, it's definitely not new. I think the fascination with composers has been with me since I can remember. And I actually almost feel like all composers are contemporary in a way. But I would say that when Dirk Nabering of the Berliner Festwochen asked me to learn the Berio violin sequenza, maybe that was actually the moment when I felt that I could express something special in that sort of area of music making, and I just loved the challenge of it being so violinistically virtuosic and theatrical and emotionally fulfilling and vulnerable and wild at the same time. And he also gave me some other opportunities to learn really out there pieces, like Lachenmann, Toccatina, which I at first actually had trouble kind of fulfilling the role of. And so I kind of eased into it just because I was asked to learn pieces over the years. But I would say that the teacher I had in Hamburg, where I grew up, my violin teacher, really ingrained in us this feeling that we were really responsible to fulfill what's written in the score and to really take incredibly seriously what the composer meant. And so it's always been so fascinating to me to read between the lines of all the dead composers. And so being able to work with a living composer, like you said, is just such a thrill and so meaningful.
Very cool. I'm just gonna ask a follow-up question, and then I'm gonna get to Moritz. When you are approaching something new, and I should have written it down because the words that you just used were so beautiful. You talked about the vulnerability and the wildness that can coexist in a new work. And for me, that often comes from the sort of technical, like, how do I do this? How do I get these dots to come out on the violin? Because it's not always as obvious as it might be. Do you have, and I'm thinking about this too because I have a few students who are playing brand new pieces right now, and we're exploring them together. Like, how do you figure out how to make something sound? And do you have a routine in that way that helps you learn a composer's new language? When we look at Beethoven or Mozart, we kind of, from looking at it, we know what it's going to sound like. even if we, hopefully are changing our interpretations every time. But we know when we look at the page how that should sound. When I received the Sciarrino in the mail, which just came yesterday, I looked at it, and I haven't put my hands on it yet, but I looked at it and I thought, I don't know how this is going to sound. Can you talk about that feeling a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that I have no method because I feel like every piece or every style, composing style, is, I mean, there can be such different extremes. And I guess if I think about looking at a piece by Beethoven, of course I can hear more easily uh, what the notes are going to be, but I still have to connect emotionally. And to me, that's always the clue, or that's what will, in the end, um, enable me to give a convincing performance. Also, is that I can read between the lines, and obviously, some composers write incredibly. I mean, like Alban Berg, he writes so much in his music that it's sometimes hard to look behind it and beyond all the small rubato markings that actually mean, is rallentando, accelerando all the time, and it just kind of means a free rubato kind of playing. So even with him, who I think is such a romantic composer, it's actually, you have to almost get it in your muscle memory and deep down into your soul what you want to express, so you can free yourself from the music again. And so what I try to do, and it's sometimes easier and sometimes very difficult, is to connect with the music on an emotional level and to get into the story of it or into the deeper meaning of it as soon as I possibly can. So while deciding on fingerings, or while only being able to play it way under tempo, I also find it more fun, more fun to practice that way.
Yeah. Um, that's a lot. That's a lot to think about right there. Okay, I'm going to switch my focus. Moritz, time for me to talk to you and to ask you some questions. So I have to say, when I was looking for your biographical information, I found lots of things that looked very interesting and very long in German. And my German is
It's always long.
it's always my German is pretty much confined to ordering coffee and talking about how it's still raining. Um, my first trip to Germany, it rained the entire time, so we talked a lot about
That's right now,
as
actually.
regnant. But anyway, I did find I found an English language biography that I read, and I thought, okay, this doesn't really tell me the story. It tells me about his prizes and his operas, and my sort of initial reaction to what I found out about you, both through Elizabeth and through the wonders of Google, is that you seem like a person of great passions and intensity and a lot of ideas. I don't know why that's my impression, but it is. And I would love to know from you, when you're asked for a new piece, um, what do you do? I mean, this is always my question to a composer. Like, you've been asked to write a piece, and the composers I've worked with mostly have told me that they really like to be given constraints. Like, they like to know how long, they like to know where it might be programmed, who's playing it, that those things all help them sort of channel their idea making into a sort of stream. But at the end of that stream, you have to start putting dots on paper, and I wonder how that happens for you. Is that
That's
too
a good
vague?
question. I cannot answer that quickly. But interestingly, I had a discussion very similar with a student of mine today about this process. And she, a female student, she said that she finds it really difficult to work from a musical idea alone. She always needs some kind of topic, some kind of theme for her music. And that's when her imagination starts to roam and when she gets the ideas. And I think I'm very similar, actually. I don't think I need the constraints that you described so much, but what I need is really a pitch for the piece for myself, where I have the feeling, okay, this is what I really want to do. Because first of all, as you know, in the practice of composition, very often the commissions are very abstract, like writing a violin concerto for Elisabeth. Yeah, so of course I say yes. Yeah, as a wonderful performer, wonderful human being, I want to do it, but that's still not the piece, of course. Yeah, I wish it was, but it's not enough. So I have to think about it. And basically, what I try to do as a trick, and this is an advice I give to young composers, I actually have like 10 to 20 ideas for pieces in my head that I constantly think about, and I try to mature them a bit like a good whiskey or a good wine, and they are with me. So sometimes when I think about music, I constantly hear music anyway in my head. So sometimes I hear these pieces, and I have not even written them, and I don't even have a commission for them. They're just there. And when I get approached with a commission, or if musicians approach me to write a piece, then either it rings a bell somewhere in my head or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then it might be that I say, okay, I don't know, I don't really feel inspired by this project, and I'm sorry. Yeah, you have to find the honesty to say that as well. If it doesn't grab you, sometimes you get proposals where you say, okay, this could be something interesting, and then I like to think about it. And the longer the process is that I think about a piece before actually starting to write it, the better. And I would compare it a bit to like Zen painters, Japanese painters work, they contemplate for a month, sitting just there and staring at the canvas. And then they get up and they do, and then the picture is finished, yeah? Because they have so much prepared the moment of when they are going to paint, then that the painting itself is like the culmination of this process. And I like very much this idea. And once I have the piece, if the subject, if I have it grasped, then actually the process of composition can be relatively easy. I mean, it's never easy, but then I flow into it. But it needs this process where I just have to contemplate the music, pitch ideas in my head, make perhaps sometimes recordings on my iPhone where I whistle something into it or something. But I collect all these little bits, and then at some point it's ready, like a plant that's growing. So I would describe it like that. Yeah.
I wish violin playing were like that.
I wish piano playing was like that.
Okay, so that's my next question. I think Elisabeth told me that you were a pianist, or you are a pianist, and so I'm very curious about this as well. So, as a performer, you deal with other people's music, I assume, not just your own. And do you find that the two things kind of coexist nicely, like performer composer, or do you have kind of two sets of, like two brains almost, that one goes this way and one is this way, and when they mesh, what is that like when you play your own music?
I mean, I am a pianist. I would call myself an active pianist, but I feel less like a pianist right now than ever in my life, because I haven't given concerts for a really, really long time. I mean, live concerts, and I'm sure that other musicians feel the same. We feel like there's something untrained there. I mean, I can practice, I do practice, but without a goal, it's a different thing. So I feel a bit uneasy at the moment as a pianist. But I am a pianist, and what you ask, the problem to juggle those two things was apparent when I was studying, because I had great professors, and of course each of them, and that was also perfectly right, demanded my full attention. I mean, my piano teachers demanded my full attention, my composition teachers demanded my full attention, and of course also the schools demand full attention to the different curriculums. So this can be very stressful. And I remember that I suddenly, after my studies were finished, and I was just working freelance as a composer and a pianist, and actually, at the beginning, I earned much more money as a pianist, because I actually had jobs where I could play concerts, whereas the composition side is much easier. I mean, much more difficult to earn money, as you know. So it was really important for me to actually play the piano, because it gave me freedom. It gave me freedom to compose. That was a very, very important part after my studies. And after my studies, it really felt great, to be honest, Cecily. I was always very happy that I would experience both of these sides. And I'm very, very thankful that I have the experience how it is to stand on a stage and to perform also pieces by other people. Also to know, we all musicians, we know we're on stage, we're playing something, and we know exactly when is the audience bored, when is it gripped, we know that, we feel that somehow, and sometimes it's our fault, and then we have to correct it as musicians, but sometimes it's also the composition's fault, I mean, to be honest. And it was very, very helpful for me to just also play my own music as a pianist at some point, and realize these things, and to find the moments where I felt that the communication with the listeners was happening instantly, or where it was more difficult. And that taught me a lot. I was also, very interested, for example, I actually performed as a singer in an opera once, just to experience how it is if you're standing on a stage and you have to look at the conductor and to kind of get it together. Because as a composer, I was very often annoyed with singers who never have any rhythm. It's like, why don't you sing in rhythm? I mean, the guy is beating here. Why isn't it in time? And once you're on stage yourself and you do all kinds of actors things on stage, you suddenly realize how difficult it actually is to bring these things together. And that was also very helpful for me. It actually made me very humble as a composer to realize that I was wrong, And so for me, those two things go together. And I never had a situation in my life where, luckily, where I felt that I should answer this question, are you a pianist more or are you a composer more? Right now, in COVID times, I'm probably more of a composer, because that's what I can prepare long-term projects. But without a concert coming up, the need to practice really hard is, of course, not so great. Yeah? But I find both worlds go together, and we also all know as musicians that the divide between composers and performers happened roughly around Berlioz and Richard Wagner. It's a historical fact. Before that, if you had asked Mozart or Beethoven, are you a pianist or a composer, they wouldn't even have understood the question, because they saw themselves as a musician. And for a musician, it was absolutely normal to be able to play instruments, to conduct, to perform. It was all together. Haydn played all kinds of instruments, and he conducted, he composed. That was his job. So there was no divide. And I think that was a very happy time. Because it made composers more practical. And I don't think practicality, writing for musicians, knowing how they feel when they play, is a really important aspect of composition. You can achieve greatness with abstraction also, but I find that much, much harder than actually experiencing it and learning it by doing. And I would recommend all my students, even if you're not super virtuoso, brilliant on your instruments, keep playing them. I mean, keep playing in ensembles, keep playing in orchestras if you can, just for the experience of it, just to become better composers.
I'd just like to add that Moritz is a super virtuosic, incredible pianist, and we actually met this way, didn't we? We played the Kurtak trio, the homage to Robert Schumann, and I was just so impressed with how every note was filled with blood and love that you played. And so we actually met as performers first, and then we played the Zimmermann piano trio, Présence, with masks.
Which also was very impressed with Elisabeth, because this is a piece which is so hard that actually you have recordings where there's only part of the note text is realized. But Elisabeth was always looking at it, and I said, Elisabeth, this part is impossible. It's on the recording with the Kontarski brothers. It's not. They didn't play it, but Elisabeth was also very calmly, let's look. And she was playing it slow. No, it's possible. It's possible.
Slowly, yes.
Possible for her, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually my next question. How did you meet? So now I know. That's amazing. I'd like to talk about the possible and the impossible idea, and how far and this is maybe for both of you, how far you'll go to push that idea of if something's really possible. I had I think as performers, we tend to doubt our own abilities. At least I do. You look at what you're being asked to do, whether it's Brahms or something brand new, and you think, oh, how can I bring my best to this, and how can I best bring off the page what I'm seeing? And sometimes, you do get to a point where it's like, I don't think I can do this. I can't make this sound. And I know early in my experiences with living composers playing their music, I was very reluctant to say anything like, oh, I don't think I can do this. Because it was always, you know, oh, give me another week. I'll just keep at it. I'll keep doing it. But there maybe are times when something that's being asked is, maybe it's possible, but could the same thing be achieved another way is a question that's worth asking. And in fact, I was hearing a student yesterday who's playing a brand new piece on her postgraduate recital, and with her pianist who is the composer, he had written a tritone trill in a low position for 6 bars. And I just looked at it and I thought, and I could see my student's poor hand cramping. I thought, is there another way to get this same thing across? And she would never have asked, but you know, I'm the loudmouthed American teacher saying, really? Do you really need that? And I questioned him, and he thought about some other things that maybe he could do. But how do you both feel about that process of collaboration between performer and composer?
Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear Moritz's opinion, because I was brought up to think that, I mean, if you look at Tchaikovsky concerto or other incredibly famous and pieces that are played all the time, and they were believed to be impossible to play. And so I always feel like, who am I to decide? I just have to keep working until I get it. And I guess my only measure in a way is whether it feels in a way still like violin playing. You know, there's some things that are so abstract and so far removed from the art of violin playing that then it doesn't really feel like a violin piece. But I'd be so reluctant to ask to have something changed, but I wonder if it would be wise to do this more often. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I probably would have answered this question very differently 30 years ago. I think it changes a bit with time and with your experience, and it also has a lot to do with the musicians themselves. I mean, I was in the situation like you two, where I also as a pianist had to premiere pieces by composers who didn't have a clue about the piano, which is more common today than 200 years ago, where everybody played piano. But now you have very often composers who actually don't even know how to play a simple sonatina on the piano, so they don't know anything about the problems of piano playing. And the thing is that for my pride as a composer, then I thought, okay, this colleague doesn't have a clue about the piano, but I'm also too proud to say something like you know, to say, this is not possible, because it could sound whiny or complaining, you know. So I said, okay, what the heck, I try, you know. And there are some instances in my memory when I actually learned a lot by doing something that at first was really, really awkward and horrible to play. But then it somehow expanded my possibilities. I mean, I can give you an example. There was a piano piece by David Lang, who can play a little piano, but doesn't know a lot about the piano. The American composer, you know him, of course. And this is a piece, a very early piece, pre-minimal piece called While Nailing at Random. And this piece was a 10-minute orgy of very close-knit cluster chords that he would play very fast, like da 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 da. And then in each of these chords, there were just some notes were changing all the time. So what he wanted was like moving clusters, chromatic, very, very complex chords in both hands, and moving outwards, moving inwards, and always like da 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 da, like this. Yeah. So it was difficult from a technical point to do this repetition, but also to change these chords so quickly. And I practiced this piece for months. It was like a horror etude. You know, my neighbors hated me. My fellow students hated me, because the piece was also really aggressive and very loud and ugly. You know, that's what he wanted at that time, David. But I learned a lot, by just persevering and trying to do it as good as possible. I think I never played this piece perfectly, because it was just impossible to play. But I came closer in a spiritual sense to achieving it, and it actually made me grow in a way as a performer, and that was good. But on the other hand, now with my experience and also how dumb composers sometimes are. I mean, you guys have too much respect, Elisabeth. Sometimes composers just write something, like even Beethoven did that, and they just say, what the heck, I just try. You know, if the musician will complain, and we know that Beethoven's violinists complained famously, he just, you know, okay, I just do it. Let's see. I mean, Beethoven did these things in his piano sonatas as well, of course, yeah. And now pianists can play it. That's the strange thing, because now you take Beethoven very seriously, and then you practice the Hammerklavier Sonata, and then it's possible to play. But of course, he always touches the impossible. And I think Beethoven was probably reluctant to take criticism, but nowadays, if I write for an instrument that I don't know well, or even if I write for Elisabeth, and Elisabeth comes to me and says, Moritz, this tritone trill, I don't know if that works so well in this passage. I would actually listen to her, you know, and I would not be completely against changing a certain aspect of a piece if I realize that even a high-class performer will have difficulties with it, and that will hinder a certain kind of expression that I want. Elisabeth gave a wonderful example with the Berg concerto, which is of course very overnotated, but actually we all know that Berg wanted this flowing, extreme, expressive, not adhering to any boundaries kind of violinist style. And the only way he could achieve it, because this was before graphical improvisational notation, he had to overnotate it. But you have to somehow look behind the many, many markings in the notes and find this freedom again. And this might actually, and this is sacrilegious, I know, this might actually mean that you play a passage less exact than he writes. But if you understand the spirit from how he writes it, I think he would have been very happy. And there are moments when I feel that musicians understand what I do, and it's perhaps not the most perfect rendition of it, but they understand what I spiritually wanted, emotionally wanted to express. Then that actually will impress me as well. You know, I'm not the person who's saying, okay, this intonation here is awkward or something, because I'm more interested in how it is expressed in general. Yeah, and there's many anecdotes with composers who are not so worried about wrong notes, but more worried about the interpretation. Like my teacher Kilmay, he was never worrying about if you played a note wrong, but he was very, very strict if you played it wrong musically. He was really, really strict. Kurtak is known to be really precise with how it is played in how he wants it. You know, so there are different composer types as well. But in the end, to put it short, communication is everything. So composers should talk, living composers should talk to living musicians, and that's great.
All right. Well, I would like to hear some living music here. So I have this beautiful video of Elisabeth to share, but could one of you introduce the piece? This is the...
I don't want to talk all the time. So this is actually wonderful. The video that we are seeing is a wonderful birthday surprise that Elisabeth did for me. And she just, without announcing it, I had sent her this music of this violin cycle that I did, which was a project for the Kronberg Academy. And they did a Beethoven cycle where they had all the violin sonatas. And they wanted a composer to compose pieces in between these violin sonatas. So I did the cycle where for every Beethoven sonata, I would write a piece, a companion piece that could be played before by the soloist then. And the cycle is called Mir mit dir in German. This is a part of the famous letter to the Unsterbliche Geliebte that Beethoven wrote. You know, he had this mysterious love affair where there are all these theories, and there's a beautiful line where it says he was mir mit dir, which is difficult to say. Me with you is not the best translation, no. It's poetic German, let's put it like that. It's a love expression, and what I try to do in the cycle is to use compositional material that Beethoven might have used. So very often it is actually very tonal. Without ever citing his music or, you know, using direct quotes. There are some rare instances where I wrote something like an intro into the sonata so that it could be played immediately. But most of the time, these pieces are independent. But I try to get into the spirit of Beethoven and realize something that would sound perhaps like if Beethoven lived today. I mean, I don't have delusions of grandeur, but it's just as an idea, and would write for the violin solo, which he did not do, you know, and that is the attempt. And Elisabeth plays one of the movements, number, what was it again? I mean, you know your piece better than me. Number 3, yeah, of the 10 pieces. So it's actually the companion piece for the 3rd violin sonata. And perhaps you can add something, Elisabeth, from your playing experience. I
was actually working on the 3rd Beethoven sonata, and so it was drawn to it naturally, but I also just instantly loved the opening. I just loved the sound of it and the lines in it, and the beauty of it and the warmth. And so I was choosing a solo piece to go with the premiere of your violin viola concerto. That's also going to be on the same program, and I just picked that one because I loved it. And I think it's also really very enjoyable to play. It's demanding, but in a really violinistic way. So I love that about it as well. And it really sounds like in the style of Beethoven or a contemporary, but then occasionally it will totally branch out and be very you, and be also very passionate and very much not a classical piece, but then it returns to the opening, and I think it's so beautiful in that way that it goes to an extreme and then returns to something really warm.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to it. So this is the third, is it a movement? You call it the third movement of Moritz Eggert's cycle, Mehr mit dir.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Es war wirklich ein schönes Geschenk. Very nice present. I was waking up on my birthday and I had this video in my inbox. So it was a really nice surprise.
That's just beautiful. I've watched it about 4 times today, and I could continue to. It's really beautiful, both the playing and the piece, and the idea behind it as well. I love the idea of the introductions to the Beethoven sonatas. I'd love to hear that cycle. You mentioned, Elisabeth, that you were programming this alongside the concerto. Before we get to the Sciarrino and Matthew's performance, do you want to tell us a little bit about this concerto, and is that what you're currently working on together, your most recent collaboration?
Yes, this is the really exciting project that has been in the air for
Yes.
a long time because of Corona. Actually the premiere has been postponed for the second or third time at this point, and is now scheduled for November 1st. And it's something that I have never experienced, because it's actually going to be both a violin and a viola concerto. And as I understand, in 5 movements, and 2 of them have been composed. They appeared in my inbox all of a sudden. And it's going to be a patchwork commission, and Moritz will add on to it as we go.
Yeah, it was the whole idea of the piece came actually from the project that you proposed it for the Hamburger Camerata. They want to do a Prometheus concert where they do Prometheus by Beethoven also, so it was also connected to Beethoven. And they wanted something to address also, I mean, topics like climate change and how we destroy the planet. And so it's a lot of heavy topics going into this concert. Also, viola, violin concerto for Elisabeth. She's also playing in the orchestra, and how can we do this? So I decided to somehow write something that can be included in the Prometheus piece by Beethoven, and so that it can be played, and then in the middle suddenly Elisabeth stands up and plays one movement, and then she sits down again. She's concertmaster again. I hope that's still the plan. And I was so inspired by Beethoven's still relatively unknown piece. Most people haven't heard it. But I actually also decided to do something about Prometheus. But I was also inspired by famous Alan Moore, the famous British comic writer, and so the piece will be called Promethea. So it's a female Prometheus in a way, and the 2 movements that we have already are connected to the story, and also, of course, to, as you know, the Frankenstein novel by Mary Shelley is also inspired by Prometheus. What Prometheus means is the modern Prometheus is the original title, not Frankenstein as we know it. So a lot of these things come together, and I really like this topic, and it inspired me greatly. And I hope that I will be able to write the 3 movements soon, because I'm really looking forward to it. My daughter is appearing as a ghost here. She's curious what's happening here.
It was very she melded into your virtual background in a very creepy way. That was kind of cool, and kind of from the underworld. Violin and viola in one concerto. How is that for you?
I have no idea. You have to ask Elisabeth. I don't know how she physically manages to do it, but she can, apparently. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're separate movements, so I get to put down one instrument and pick up the other. Yeah.
That's a relief. Not 2 at once.
Yeah, but I just imagine how it would be like to play on this really tiny. I mean, actually, I can do that in a way. I mean, it's possible for a pianist to play on a Mensur, we say in German, like the spaces between the keys are smaller on a toy piano, for example, and you still can play Beethoven and stuff. It's just a matter of the brain has to switch. I guess it's similar on the viola, even though it's still very impressive to just find these pitches somewhere on the string, and to get into this different system. As a pianist, I still have the keys, but you have nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, but but I'm very used to it because I do it a lot. I program a lot, violin and viola in one concert, or I used to when there were concerts.
Well, hopefully.
But I mean, if you write the two parts to be played simultaneously, I will have to think about whether I break my rule of never asking a composer to change anything.
Well, maybe by November I can come to Germany and hear it, and that would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be great.
I would love that.